Alright, so let's get started. So long. Just say hi to everyone. Wait for Daisy's coming back now.
Hello.
Hi there. I just want to say hi to everybody. All right, so let's start off with Mariella. Alright, you muted. There you go. Now I can hear you. How you doing? Good. Thanks for coming. Great. Good to see you. All right. Next we have Leanne. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Sorry.
Hi.
I'm just checking my signal because I've been having signal issues for a few times.
All right. So they're broken. All right. And Uzi is coming back now. Okay, Pamela. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And please God, we're gonna look forward to reading you what you wrote, and we'll be sending it out soon. So I'll give you a heads up for that. All right, Hannah. Hi. How you doing?
Thank you. How is everyone? How are you?
Yeah, thank God. Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right, and then Lisa, if you can hear me, I don't know if you're able to tune in, but hi again. And Evelyn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. How about yourself? You doing good today?
I think I'm here. How am I doing? I'm okay. Good to have you. Thanks so much for coming.
Shalom.
Good. All right, and then Jen Laws, you there?
I'm here. I hope everyone's having a good day.
All right, I can hear you. It sounds like you're really far away, though.
Oh, I'm probably because I'm using my Bluetooth speaker. The kids are playing board games in the room next to me, and I needed a little extra volume.
Okay, as long as you can hear. Good to have you. Thanks so much for coming. And then Bracha, you there? It's not. Oh, you there? Hi.
Yeah.
I owe you a Mazal Tov.
Thank you. Shalom, everybody.
Well, I'm back. You guys waited for me the entire time.
Yeah.
Mazel Tov to you.
Huh? Are you gonna start?
Yeah, I'm gonna start now. It's good to have you. Thanks so much for coming. Please God, you should only have more good news and more good things to come.
Amen.
All right. Oh yeah, too. Mazel tov for you. Ah.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, guys. So let's get started. Today we're gonna be looking at the order of fabrics, the second part of the order of fabrics, and just to start off, the class should be in the Refuah Shalema of Yeshayahu Yosef ben Zahari. Should have a complete recovery. So today's class, we're going to look at the order of fabrics, which we started a couple of weeks ago. And this is the second or the next part of the 39 malachas, the 39 things which are forbidden activities. We're going to look at a few of them today. There's only, I think, 6 or 7 for today's class. And I want to discuss a couple of concepts that we can apply to ourselves and what we can learn from it. So we'll start off with the introduction we had before about the temple itself. That all 39 malachas, all 39 activities were things which were forbidden because they were used in the construction of building the Mishkan, the temple. And we nowadays that we don't have the temple. So there's a very famous saying. It says in the verse, it says, "For this matter is very close to you in your heart and in your mouth to do it," which means that nowadays when we don't have a temple, So the way to serve Hashem, we don't have sacrifices, we don't have the high priest. We're going to see the significance of not having that soon. But because we're missing so many components, so the only way left really to serve Hashem nowadays is through our heart and through our mouth, which means that through our speaking, through our words, and through our meaning behind those words, that's what allows us to connect to Hashem. So I want to start off, and I think the theme for today, which is kind of relevant behind the class that we're going to discuss, and we're going to look in more detail in a moment, is the concept of what we say and the power of what we say, and the ability, and not just the ability, but the importance of being authentic with what you say, and not speaking in what you call a double tongue, which means not to speak with a forked tongue, not to say one thing and mean another, but to be consistent throughout with what you feel should be what you say. And we're going to see that in just a moment when we look at the Mishkan. So we saw earlier that the coverings of the Mishkan, there were 3 different coverings, and this is why we have the order of fabrics. There were 3 layers. The first layer was a layer made out of colored wool and linen. The second layer was made out of goat's hair, and we're going to pick up on that next time. And the third layer was made out of tachash skin and ram skin, which was dyed red. Now, what I want to jump into today is this concept of another place where fabrics were used in the construction of the Mishkan, and that is with regards to the building of the creation of the clothing for the high priest. Now, the high priest, called the Kohen Gadol, had he had 8 different sets or different pieces, items of clothing, but the one I want to focus on today is what's called the Me'il. Now, the Me'il, as you can see in the picture, was a blue robe made completely out of blue, and it's called the Cheles, and it was made in a very special way. I'll discuss it in a moment. But before I do, I just want to jump into what we said earlier about the concept of being authentic and speaking your mind and saying what you mean and saying what you feel. So we know in the parsha of the week, we just recently came up with the story of Vayigash, where Yehuda confronts Joseph without knowing who Joseph really is, and he has this big reveal where he tells his brothers, I'm Joseph, and they finally all the dots come together. So in the story leading up to that, so it says in the earlier parsha, that where it says in the Torah that when the brothers were first envious and jealous of Yosef, so they said they saw him coming down the hill, and it says in the pasuk that they saw him and they distanced themselves from him. And Rashi says over there that from their disgrace we can see their virtue. What does that mean? So Rashi explains further and says that they didn't speak that echod b'peh be'echod b'libon, one way with their heart and one way with their mouth. They were authentic in what they said. So when the brothers spoke to Joseph, they made it very clear to him that they hated him. Right? They told him up front and very clearly that they didn't like him. And that's what Rashi is meaning when he says that they spoke in an authentic way. They weren't speaking with one way with their mouth, right, and one way with their heart. Now, very often, right, a person can be inauthentic, which means that you can feel one way, and you don't express how you feel to someone. You don't say what you're really feeling, right? So that is a flaw, right, in the character of speech, in the speech of a person, that we see from the brothers. There's a pasuk which says, "L'sisna es achicha b'lvovecha," which means that you shouldn't hate your brother in your heart. Now, the Torah tells us a person shouldn't hate another person in his heart. So what should you do? You should actually go and tell him. Right? That's what the verse says, that if you don't like someone, you need to go and tell them. You need to actually be consistent. So if you feel one way, you have to say what you feel, which is a very important thing, that we need to be congruent, right, with our thoughts. We should match what we say. So, and that works both for the positive and for the negative, which means that if a person has good intentions, good feelings, and something positive, something uplifting to say to someone, so you shouldn't hold it back. Those words can actually lift a person and can help them, can encourage them. And sometimes, I'll tell you from a personal account of mine, when I first moved to the UK, so it was very unfamiliar to me. And I was in a shul where I didn't know anybody. And I was kind of shoved to one side, to the other side, and I felt like almost like a piece of furniture. And no one greeted, no one said anything. And I felt kind of very, very out of place, felt completely lost. I didn't want to be there, felt, like, this is the wrong place for me. And that all changed with one person who came over and he said to me, "Good morning." Right? And just to know that good morning, right, meant the world to me, right? It was a huge thing. It wasn't a big deal for him. I don't think he thought of it as a big deal, but the fact that one person decided he's going to come over and greet, right, and to be friendly and to be nice, so that changed my day, my perception of the situation, and it made a huge impact on me, so much so that I can remember that good morning till today. Now I'm sure that person's long forgotten about it, and it probably didn't stick out in his mind at all. But so when a person has something positive to say, so it's important that you do use your positive, speech can be very positive. And if a person has a good sentiment and something positive and encouraging to say, so you should go ahead and say it, right? You never know how those words can uplift a person. And the converse obviously is true that if a person has negative sentiments and negative feelings, so it's better to go and tell the person directly than to pretend that you're his friend, right? Is that Hashem says he doesn't like that when a person, acts like very friendly, but in his heart he hates the person. If a person's inauthentic and he's non-congruent, where he pretends that he's friendly with someone and give him a big fake smile, you can tell that the eyes are cold and there's no heart there, and he pretends on the outside that he's friendly, but in his inside, in his heart, he actually feels the opposite. He's actually full of hatred. So that's actually forbidden in the Torah law. A person needs to be authentic. You need to go and say to someone that you don't like, right, and that you don't like them, right? And maybe you can resolve it, maybe you can, and maybe you can't. But it's important not to be consistent. And the reason for that is that we need our mouth to be a tool to connect to Hashem, right? And through our mouths, we only have one mouth. And if we mess it up by being inconsistent, incongruent with our thoughts and feelings, so it tends to affect our prayers, which means that when we pray to Hashem, we're not being consistent, we're not being sincere, because we speak with our mouths and our hearts don't match. So it's very important that our mouth, what comes out of our mouth, is a true reflection of what we really feel. And that was the lesson. Now, I want to take it a little bit further, and we know the famous story of Cain and Hevel, right? Cain and Abel. That's one of the earliest stories, right, in the Torah, in Genesis, right? When the story goes as follows: those two brothers, right, Cain and Abel, right, Cain and Hevel, and they both wanted to serve Hashem, right? They both had a desire to serve God. And they each one came with their sacrifice. Right, the Cain, right, was a wheat farmer. He brought a wheat, right, to as a sacrifice to Hashem. And Hevel, his brother, right, he was an animal shepherd, and he brought animal sacrifices to Hashem. And as the verse explains, right, God accepted the sacrifices from Hevel, right, from Abel, but he didn't accept the sacrifices from Cain, from Cain. And in a fit of rage, right, or jealousy, right, Cain says to God, why is it that you rejected my offer, my sacrifices, right? If you took my brothers, what is it? You only accept his prayers and his sacrifices because they know them, they're meat, they're better, it's higher quality, and you're rejecting mine. You're letting mine go just because it's wheat. Is that not important to you? That that I'm also sincere. And Cain couldn't control his anger. He couldn't control his emotions, and what he ended up doing was he ends up going and stabbing and killing his brother Hevel, right? And that was the first murder, right, accounted for in the Torah. Now, what's interesting, right, the Ramban explains over there that the first murder to take place in the Torah, Cain had no idea how to kill a person. It had never been done before. Right? And as a result, the Ramban describes a very gruesome scene of how Cain tried to kill his brother Abel. And what he did was he took a knife, right, and he stabbed his brother in every single possible place, not knowing which is the organ which sustains life. So he literally stabbed his brother in every single part of his body, right? And the Ramban described a gruesome scene of how his was covered in blood. He killed his brother by stabbing him every single way, not knowing which place of the organ was the one that's going to sustain life, or the organ that's keeping his brother alive. And eventually Cain, disappears, and God comes to him and confronts him and says, "Where's your brother Abel?" And Cain replies with the famous line. He says, "I'm my brother's keeper. What have I got to do with it? Why are you asking me? You, God, you know where Abel is." And obviously God does know, and God confronts him and says, "You murdered your brother." Right? And that was the first case. Now the commentaries explain that the root cause of that murder to take place was the root cause was envy, was jealousy. That Cain could not handle the jealousy which exploded inside of him by being so jealous of his brother about what his brother had, right? And that was kind of what led to eventually to murder. Right? So the suppressed feelings of rage and animosity and hatred and jealousy eventually couldn't be contained within him, and that eventually led to murder. So when we say to a person, should be congruent with their mouth, it's not just something which is a nice idea or something, which is a virtue to uphold, but in reality, it can lead to disastrous results, and it can even lead to murder. And that's why the Torah relates to the story of how it's so important for us to be sincere with how we speak. What we say should be how we feel, and the two should always be. So when a person speaks to you, they should know exactly that what you're saying is the authentic version of you. Now, in addition to that, was interesting side note, you could say, is that the Torah, the Ramban says that because Cain was the first to murder, so God brought down a very special gift that he gave to Cain and his descendants. Cain had a descendant called Tubal Cain, or Tubal Cain in Hebrew. And Tubal Cain, he was the first person to make warfare, or make arrows and other weapons which hadn't existed before. And all weapons which came into the world later on came about through this blessing, or through this channel of using the natural elements to weaponize them in order to kill human beings. So that's what he brought into the world. He brought the ability for a person to use natural resources and turn them into weapons, and to use those weapons to kill people. And that was the first time, right, where that happened. So that's just an important, I think, starting point to explain why it's so important that we have this consistency inside of us. Now, I want to jump with that idea into the concept of the me'il. Now, the me'il was made entirely out of blue wool, and at the bottom of the me'il, there were bells and pomegranates. The bells were made out of gold, and they were functional bells. They made a noise. We'll look at it in just a second. And the purpose of the me'il, right, was to atone for the sin of bad speech or evil speech. We'll see what that is soon as well. Now, just to explain what the me'il was made of, so it was made of techeles, blue wool. Now, how did they make blue wool in the Mishkan? Where did they get blue from? Where does the ink of blue come from? So the blue came from the blood of a special fish called the chilazon fish, right? And the chilazon fish is something which some explain it to be, they say that the fish still exists today. It's called the cuttlefish. Others say that the chilazon fish is extinct. It doesn't exist anymore. But even if it exists, right, did exist, it still may be around. Like, for example, I think it was about 20 years ago, so there was a fish called the coelacanth, which was thought to be prehistoric and extinct for many thousands of years. And it was found in Nasna, right, off the coast in South Africa, where they found this fish. It was found by a professor, William Smith, right? And actually, I was once on the river where he found it. So I once was going on a tour in Nasna, and I saw the place where they found it. So it could be that this fish is extinct. Could be that it still exists, but nevertheless, it was the blue was made from the blood of this chilazon fish. Now, the me'il was made in a very special way. Right? There was the sewing which was done. They had to be made in one set of sewing. Right? There couldn't be any tears. So normally for a neck, what you normally do, right, is they would cut a hole and then sew in a hem, right, inside the neck to make an opening. For the me'il, what the me'il was made in one set. There was no, it's actually forbidden. The Torah says, lo yikorea, cannot be torn. So no part of the me'il could be torn and restitched. It had to be made out of one continuous fabric, and it was a very special and complicated way of producing this item of clothing. Now, there's a famous Talmud, right, which says, I think it's the Gemara I think it's in Sanhedrin, and the Gemara says that the me'il atoned for lashon hara, right, and the rationale behind it is that these bells at the bottom that would make a noise, and every time the high priest would walk into the holy and do his service, so behind him or emanate from him, right, the sound of these rustling bells, right, would be constantly jingling along as he walked around, and that was making a noise. And the Talmud says that thing which made the noise, right, i.e. the me'il is the only garment which produced the sound, and that which produced the sound, right, would be able to atone for the sounds which made. So that the people who spoke with their mouth and made sounds which were hurtful and harmful, so the me'il atoned for that. And the Chafetz Chaim brings nowadays that we don't have this me'il, and we don't have the high priest, we don't have this item of clothing to atone for our sins. So our speech is actually more important today than it was in previous generations. And the reason for that is because what we say, right, there's no way to atone for it. So because we don't have this method of atoning, we have to be extra careful nowadays with our speech. All right, so that was the idea behind the me'il. Now, there's a very famous concept, right, which is brought in the sages. It comes from the Mishnah in Avos, and the Mishnah in Avos says the following: it says, "Da malo malo mimcha." Right, and that's in Hebrew. I'll translate it to English. Da, no. Malo malo. The simple translation is malo malo, that which is above. Mimcha, you. So the simple understanding is know what's above you. Okay, and the Mishnah continues. A person should always be aware that Hashem is watching you, Hashem is seeing whatever you're doing. There's no such thing as doing something in secret, that Hashem can see your every action, your every move. So, da mala mala mimcha, know what's above you. Right? That's one of the reasons, by the way, why we wear head covering, right? It's called a yamelka, right? It actually stands for Yoreh Malchus Shomayim, which means to fear heaven, to know that you have a head, but on top of your head there's something, right? There's something above you. There's Hashem's presence is always looking down upon you, right? And the verse continues, the Mishnah continues, and says that the whole everything which you do, b'sefer nichtavim, is written in a book, and everything is accounted for. So that's a simple understanding. Now there's a deeper understanding which is brought in a book called the Nefesh HaChaim. And the Nefesh HaChaim explains this verse or this concept on a deeper level, and says the following: it says, "Da, you should know, mala mala, that which happens in heaven, mimcha, is from you." Okay, which means that whatever happens in heaven, anything which happens in heaven, is a direct result of what you're doing here on the physical realm. When you interact with the physical realm, when you do actions, when you speak things, when you think things, when these things which you do say and feel, those have a direct influence, and it has an influence in heaven, and in turn it creates a cycle, and that brings down results into this world. So our actions and our speech are important, because mala mala, that which happens above, mimcha, is from you, which means that through our prayers we have the ability to change and influence the world. Because mala mala, what's above, mimcha, is from you. It's up to you to make that change, right? To make that difference by what you say and what you do. Now, jumping in now to the order of fabrics. So there's 6 of them which we're going to look at today, and then we'll take questions when we're done. So the first one is oireg, weaving. The second is poitseya, unraveling. Third one, kosher, tying a knot. Matir, untying a knot. Fifth one is toifer, sewing. And the 6th one is korea, which is tearing. Okay, so let's just jump in, and we'll see this is all got to do with the making of garments. So one on Shabbos is not allowed to weave. So the definition of weaving is any activity whereby thread is passed under and over warp threads. And we discussed the last time that when weaving is done, there's an under-over crisscross lattice pattern which is formed. Now, examples of that are making a basket or making a straw hat. Right? And in general, unless you are involved in sewing, right, on a daily basis, you probably wouldn't come across this on Shabbos, but this is one of the processes of making fabrics. Okay, the next one is called poitseya, which is unraveling. and that's exactly the same as weaving, but it's in reverse. So that any activity whereby a thread is unraveled under and over, right? And the example is pulling out loose threads from a garment. Now, you might find this, for example, if you buy, let's say, a new suit or something like that, or new clothing. Sometimes you'll find like there's like a strand of fabric which is still loose after it's been cut, and whatever it is. That on Shabbos, if you have that, you wouldn't be able to pull out that one piece of fabric because you'll be unraveling, right? So that on Shabbos will be forbidden. So just something to be aware of, right? Again, it doesn't happen on a daily basis, but just to be aware, right, that this is one of the 39 malachas. Okay. Now, moving along, we have kosher. Now, this one is probably much more relevant to us, and it happens that we will come across this more often on Shabbos. And what's forbidden is any activity by which a permanent type of professional knot is brought into being. Now, the concept over here is that there has to be two elements to make it forbidden from Torah law. The first one is that it has to be a permanent type of knot. Right? What permanent means is a discussion. Some say it lasts for 24 hours. Some say it lasts for a week. Right? But there's different definitions. But it's permanent in its way. And the second is there has to be a professional knot. A knot has to, which is forbidden on Shabbos, must also be professional. But we'll see in a second what a professional knot looks like. But if a knot is both professional and long-lasting, one couldn't make such a knot on Shabbos. Okay, and that would be forbidden from Torah law. If a knot is either long-lasting and non-professional, or it's professional but not long-lasting, it's got one of the two characteristics, then it's forbidden to make such a knot on Shabbos, but that will be rabbinically forbidden and not Torah law. Okay, and examples are making an overhang knot, or a second one, making a surgical knot. Now, I've got over here some examples of what professional knots look like, right? I wouldn't know how to make these in any ways, but just to give you some understanding of what they are. Right, so one of the knots over here, the Alpine butterfly loop, right, the back splice, that's maybe more common. You've got a barrel hitch knot, a bowline, you've got eye splice, you've got lashing, right, whether it be diagonal or right, different types of, right, so all these types of knots, they are called professional knots. They have a special name and a special method how they are made. So one could not make any of these types of knots on Shabbos because they are both professional and long-lasting. Now, one of the questions which often comes out is, can you tie shoelaces on Shabbos? Right, that's probably the biggest question which gets asked. Right, and that is with regards to tying shoelaces. Right, is there a problem of tying shoelaces on Shabbos? So in short, the answer is yes, you can tie shoelaces, but there is a little bit of a discussion behind it. So just to give you some of the discussion, is whether or not a bow is normally not permanent, and it's not long-lasting, and it's not professional. So for the most part, tying shoelaces, right, is not something which requires any level of professionalism, and nor is a bow lasting. Right? Bows often come undone. Now, what a lot of people do when they tie shoelaces, they don't just tie the bow, but they also make a double knot. Now, the question is, can you make a double knot on your shoelaces on Shabbos? So over here, there's actually a discrepancy, two different customs. There's the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi custom. So the Ashkenazi custom follows the Ramah, right? And the Ramah and the Mishnah Berurah and others say that you may not make a double knot on Shabbos. When you tie your shoelaces, you may not make a double knot. The Sephardic opinion, right, according to the Yalkut Yosef and many others, is that even making a double knot is allowed on Shabbos. Right, so that's something which is allowed, and just the Magen Avram, who's a very powerful commentary, right, a very relied upon source. So he says that even a double knot would be allowed, because a double knot is never your intention when you tie your shoelaces to leave the knot on permanently. You're always going to untie your shoes and tie them up and open and close your shoes constantly. So making a double knot, it's not going to be so tight. And if you don't make a double knot which is tight, So then that would be allowed. So practically speaking, what a lot of people do is they do make a double knot on their shoelaces on Shabbos, and they don't make it extra tight. Right? So that's a practical example of where having what you call where having your shoelaces on Shabbos would apply. Now, the opposite of that is what's called matir. Now, matir is untying a knot, and that, again, that's the reverse of it. And it's any activity by which a permanent type of professional knot is undone. So if you look at any of the examples, undoing an overhang knot or undoing a surgical knot, those will be examples of matir. So any knot which is permanent, you could not, it's like you can't make it, so you cannot undo it. Now, one of the places where you'll find that is, for example, if you have, let's say, food in a packet, sometimes you have bread, let's say, which is tied up in a bag, and the bag's got a knot. Can you undo that knot on Shabbos? Or situations like that, or tying up a garbage bag, right? Can you make a knot in a garbage bag on Shabbos? Right? So these are questions which do come around. But for the most part, what we have to be considerate of is it a professional knot, and is it a long-lasting knot? If the answer to both of those is yes, then one may not make such a knot on Shabbos. Okay. Now the last two is going to be, the next one is toifer, which is sewing, and the definition of that is any activity that permanently bonds two materials together by means of a third substance. Okay, so that's what happens when you sew something. You're taking two pieces of fabric, and through taking a yarn and going through, right, you joining a fabric A to fabric B using your yarn. So you're using a third substance to join another together. Now, an example would be sewing and pasting, right? And this is something which comes out on Shabbos, which we might come across it. And that is, for example, you've got sticky notes, right? Can you take on Shabbos a sticky note, right, and stick it onto something on Shabbos, right? So let's say not writing, but it's already been written. Can you take a sticky note and place it down? So that could be a form of pasting, because what you're doing is the glue acts as an adhesive, and you're joining, right? That's the means of a third substance. So you've got a third substance which would join the sticky note to whatever it is that you're sticking it to, and that would make it, it could be that it's forbidden. So one couldn't paste. So glue, for example, would be the third substance, just like the material is. It's not specifically sewing, but using any third substance to join two items together. So it could be two pieces of wood with wood glue, or taking glue and pasting or fixing two things together. It could be even a separate thing. But any time that we join two items together, that's called sewing, right? Even though we're not sewing. So gluing isn't sewing, but will fall under that category. And finally, right, we have korea, which is tearing, and that's any activity which tears a material apart to facilitate rejoining. Okay, and an example of that is removing stitches. Right? So, for example, if you have stitches, let's say, we can have we will need to tear them, and you cut them out in order that you can rejoin or use it again. So korea, in terms of the laws of Shabbos, is for constructive purpose. So tearing in general is not is forbidden only when the purpose of the tearing is to produce something constructive out of it. Now, one of the areas where this comes out with is actually, we'll deal with it in more detail when we deal with the section of personal hygiene, is toilet paper on Shabbos, right? You may have seen it before, right? That people on Shabbos use tissue paper and not toilet paper on Shabbos. You may be wondering where it's from. So there's actually two factors that come into play. Korea could possibly be one of them, and Korea is to be tearing, right? One's not allowed to tear. Now, by our definition, right, tearing of toilet paper, right, would not be with the intention of sticking it back afterwards. So our usage of toilet paper wouldn't fall into this category of Korea of tearing, because our intention is not to rejoin it. It's not a constructive tearing. So we'll see that there's something else, a different malacha, which will make Korea, will make or the usage of toilet paper prohibited, and that would be something called cutting on a specific space or to a specific shape, which we're going to see in the later laws, right, and later on in the 39 malachas. So, and that's a different malacha altogether, and that's a special malacha that one's not allowed to cut something to shape. You're not allowed to cut something along a specific line. Now, because toilet paper is perforated, so when you cut it, right, so you're cutting along a predefined shape, and that will be forbidden. The same thing would be if you have, sometimes you have cling wrap and things like that, where it's got like perforations, and or let's say garbage bags sometimes are perforated with little amounts, right? And when you tear them off, right, so there again you're cutting a predetermined and specified shape, and that's forbidden, but not because of korea, not because of tearing, but because of a new malacha, which we'll deal with when we get there. But for our purposes, we can't tear, right, if on Shabbos, if the intention is to rejoin. Now, when sewing, sometimes you'll make a mistake and you'll need to tear a little bit in order to fix something. Right? So that tearing is the one which is covered by this malacha. So it's quite specific, this korea, in terms of for almost related to sewing, but not necessarily. So it's kind of the opposite of the previous malacha. Now, I'll take some questions and end up with the one story, which is the interesting thing. Right? We're dealing with this, and sometimes it feels, it's a bit of nitty gritty, right? Some of it's like overcomplicated and very detailed. And one thinks to themselves, does Hashem really care? If I tear toilet paper on Shabbos, is that really something which, bothers, the creator of the universe, what I use in the bathroom on Shabbos, what's going on. So just an idea, there's a story about a guy called Vladimir. Now, Vladimir was a illiterate peasant from who lived in near Russia, and one time, so Vladimir became very wealthy. Right, he came into a huge amount of wealth, and suddenly he went from rags to riches. Now, Vladimir went and he had an important business deal, but in order to get this business deal, he had to go to Moscow. Now, from his town, his village, right, where he lived, he'd never been to Moscow before, and he had to find a way how to get there. So he asked his friends, how do people get around? What's the method of transport? This happens. The story took place in the early 19th century. So his friends tell him that there's a new mode of transport called the train. Right? So Vladimir is excited. He goes and he finds the train station. And he goes to the counter, right, and he says to the woman behind the counter that I want to get a train ticket. And he's never bought a train ticket, but no idea how it works. So the woman describes to him and says, what kind of train ticket do you want? We have 3 different options. You have third class, right? And we're basically, you're not guaranteed to have a place on the train. If it's overcrowded or sold out, you might not be able to take that train. Or if you want, we have a second class, right, where you almost guaranteed a place, and not only that, but you're going to have extra amenities and luxuries and comforts which are on board. And then we have the top tier, right, which is a first class ticket. If you have a first class ticket, you can get the best, the most amenities. You'll travel in the lap of luxury. You guaranteed a spot, right, and your place is definitely reserved. So Vladimir, now that he's wealthy, decides to himself, he's going to buy the first class ticket. So he checks out, and the person behind the counter says to Vladimir, just be very careful, because this ticket which you have, it's non-refundable, and if you lose it, we can't give you a refund. You're paying a lot of money for it, so make sure that it's well looked after. So Vladimir says, of course. He takes the ticket and he stuffs it in behind all these layers and layers of clothing, and he waits at the train station. Now the train is only due to depart 2 days later, so he comes there a little early. And because Vladimir has never taken a train before, so he says to himself, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to copy and see what the other people do. So he's at the train station early, and he sees that the first couple of people on board the carriage, right, start sneaking in, right, and going onto the very back end cabins, and they start hiding underneath the tables and underneath the benches. So Vladimir, not knowing any better, he says, okay, that's how you travel on the train. Right? So he copies them, right, and he sneaks under the benches, right, with everybody else, and he hides and he lays low like all the other people who are there. But Vladimir, that is not a good stowaway. That's not what he's doing, and his legs are sticking out. And while the train starts moving, the conductor comes around and sees Vladimir, right, and he sees his legs kicking out, and starts kicking him on the shins. He pulls him out. And he said, no, what are you doing here? You can't be on this train without a ticket. So Vladimir, right, says, I do have a ticket, right? And everyone starts laughing at him, right? Everyone obviously think, you wouldn't be stowing away if you had a ticket, right? And Vladimir says, I've got a ticket, I've got a ticket. He starts taking off his coat and then his jacket, and everyone's laughing at him as he starts getting undressed in the middle of the train, and eventually he pulls out a ticket. And the conductor looks at the ticket, right, and he sees not only does he have an economy ticket, right, he's got a first class ticket. He has the best ticket around, right, and he humbly apologizes, for his treating a first class passenger, right, and he escorts him to the front of the train, and he says, what were you doing there? Why were you, hiding underneath there like a stowaway? So he answers him honestly and truthfully. He says, I've never taken a train before. I was just copying what other people did. Right? Now, this is kind of a mashal, right? A little bit of parable for us. That we have sometimes, right, a first-class ticket. Right? We have Shabbos, right, and the laws of God in our first-class ticket, but sometimes we don't appreciate its true value. Right? And we jump into it and we practice it like a stowaway, right? As if we afraid and we're hiding and we don't realize its precious and its value, right, until we actually take out our ticket and realize how to use this ticket. Right, so this is kind of the message that we have, that the laws, right, although intricate, but it's all part of call it the luxuries of Shabbos and the specialness of Shabbos. And when we apply them and we appreciate what they are, right, that's when we truly get to experience the first class Shabbos that Hashem really wants for us to have. So with that, guys, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself. I'm happy to take any questions.
You can type your questions in, or you can just raise the hand on the thing so we can help you guys. Sorry.
I've got a question.
Yeah, sure.
Dwayne?
Is it about peeling fruit or fruit with seeds on Shabbos? Or any separating of fruit or anything like that?
Yes. So when you there's a lesson by itself which is going to be dealing with boirer, which is separation on Shabbos, and there's a class dealing with that specific concept in detail. The class all of its own. So we will come to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Anyone else? Raise your hands.
I had a question.
Yeah,
all right,
sure.
Lisa.
My question was, someone was talking to me about ripping toilet paper on Shabbos, and they thought it was an Avera, and I thought it was to do.
Right. So the law is that ideally one shouldn't be tearing toilet paper on Shabbos. You should cut it beforehand.
Okay.
However, if a person does find themselves in the bathroom and there isn't any pre-cut toilet paper, then you may use toilet paper as usual, and there's something called kavod habrius, or the dignity of a human being, that overrides and so takes precedence in that case. But if you can prepare beforehand, it's something which you should do.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Tada.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else? Thank you, Lisa. All right, Sylvia, go ahead. Or Bracha first, and then Sylvia.
Okay, so just to piggyback on the toilet paper.
I can hardly hear that.
I read something about not tearing it on the perforated area, or if you do it, doing it unusually, like with a different part of your body.
So her question was about the perforated tears that are already in the paper, or can you do something unusual with like another part of your body to rip it?
Right. So there is something which is called a shinoi, which is or what's called in Gemara terms kala'achayad, doing it in a different way than would normally be done. And if a person does have a situation where he's faced with having to break Shabbos, so then he can do it with a shinoi in a different way, and it lowers the degree of the violation. This reminds me of a story of I think it was with the Rav Steipler of Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was a huge gadol in the Jewish people, great sage of recent times. So he was taken away to Siberia. And in Siberia, part of the punishment what they had to do is that they took them on brutes in the army training. And because they had to work on Shabbos, right, one of the things that he had to do, well, he had to shoot a machine gun, right, on Shabbos. Now he knew that shooting in a normal way would be prohibited, right, because of Aish or perhaps other malachas. So what he did was he turned this machine gun upside down, and he learned to shoot this machine gun. He did a shinoi. He turned the machine gun upside down and learned how to shoot it, with the machine gun upside down. And he became so good at doing that with almost perfect accuracy that he later, I think he received a medal, was recognized for using a weapon in a non-traditional fashion. So one obviously should do whatever they can, right, not to violate Shabbos. If one is in a situation where the laws of Shabbos can be compromised, so one has that ability to do something or with a shinoi, right, in a different way.
Can I add to that briefly as well?
Sure.
So another thing a lot of people do, instead of using like the regular toilet paper, like he said earlier, they use like little cutouts of toilet paper, or you can use wet wipes, flushable wet wipes.
So using wet wipes on Shabbos is it's something which again it's for the most part allowed. There could be a problem of extracting water or squeezing, but for the most part it should be allowed. There are those who are more strict and don't allow very wet or very moist wet wipes. But those are for the majority of opinions, one can use wet wipes on Shabbos, and obviously you can use tissues and you can use toilet paper as long as it's being cut beforehand.
All right. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Sylvia?
Shalom. The question I had, say with cooking, I know we're not supposed to cook on Shabbos, but what if you have people come over and what you have was just enough for you and you want to extend it? Can you like open a can? I mean, not like use the can opener, but the ones that are pull top to kind of extend the meal. Can you do that?
Right. So long as you're not violating cooking itself, so obviously you can add and prepare other dishes which are allowed on Shabbos. So one can obviously enhance, and you can make more salads, have more bread and things like that to make the food stretch out a little longer. But what you're asking is actually a very important question. It's actually brought in the Talmud that on Yantif, where one can cook, one shouldn't have guests where you may come to cook more than you're supposed to. Right, it's called the harama, or kind of like the scars of cooking where you weren't really intending to. But on Shabbos, we're not worried about that. So practically speaking, if a person does have unexpected guests, so you wouldn't be allowed to cook. Right, having guests wouldn't be a reason to allow you to cook, unless obviously it's life-threatening, which would change the situation entirely. But in a regular situation, so you just have friends that pop around that you weren't expecting them, so you couldn't cook more, but obviously you can add and try and find other supplements to the meal to make it stretch out a little longer.
All right. And Hannah, you had a question? Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia. Sorry about that. All right, go ahead, Hannah.
Okay. About the Ma'il and Lashon Hara, I just wondered whether is can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the story you were telling about being new at a shul and those days when people don't really know you. In my situation where I am, sometimes I feel so between and betwixt in terms of how when you just treated as a stranger, and sometimes you're lucky people speak to you, sometimes you're not. But one time I wondered, maybe there are other people who are also new like me, and I could say hello, but you don't want to be presumptuous. So when I think about that, and I'm also thinking about what you were saying about authenticity and having a good balance between what's in your heart and what one speaks. if you think that what you have to say may be presumptuous, so you withhold it, is that necessarily a bad thing? Are you speaking, Uzia? I can't hear you.
All right.
Sorry.
So just if I understand your question, Hannah, I mean, it comes down to a matter of being tactful and to know, to basically be able to judge the situation for what's really going on. Right? And I think you have an internal sense or reference, you know, when it's the right thing and when it's the appropriate or the inappropriate time to speak. So and a person should trust their gut feeling. Right? When you feel something, if you feel that someone needs to be welcomed, even if you're a guest yourself, right? And it's happened to myself many times. Sometimes you can be a guest and someone else is also a guest. Both of you are new to a place, and just because you aren't a local resident doesn't mean that you shouldn't welcome someone else in. So I don't think it's being presumptuous. I think one needs to always carry a warm heart, and be kind and friendly and good and nice to people. I think that's what it's all about. It's really what Hashem wants from us, is to be good people.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure if it answers your question, but
Okay, anyone else had any other questions? Thank you, Hannah. Going once.
Anyone else?
Yes. Going 3 times. No biters, no bitters. No one wants to say anything, ask anything. Wow, okay. Thanks, guys. And
Yes,
thank you,
thanks so
Rabbi,
much for
for
coming.
this amazing class. And may you have a
As
good week.
always, if you have any questions during the week, you can always ask me. And then please God, next week we are going to be starting the next set, or the next order, which is the order of hides, which is the process of making leather, which we're going to discuss in detail. So that's coming up
Not
in
these kind of parts,
class
right?
28. All right. Good. Shabbat Tov, everybody.
All right. Be good, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming.